For nearly 7 years, the British royal family has maintained a silence so disciplined, so carefully engineered, that the world began to wonder whether anyone inside Buckingham Palace would ever speak plainly about what really happened when Prince Harry and Meghan Markle walked away from their royal duties. Statements were issued. Spokespeople chose their words with surgical precision. Senior royals smiled through state engagements and said absolutely nothing that could be quoted against them the following morning. The palace played the long game, and it played it quietly. And then Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, spoke. What she said, how she said it, and the fact that nobody stopped her from saying it has sent shockwaves through every corner of the royal conversation, from the editorial desks of Fleet Street to the drawing rooms of Westminster, all the way across the Atlantic to the carefully managed media operation running out of Montecito, California. Because Sophie is not the kind of royal who talks. She is the kind of royal who works. And when someone like that finally opens their mouth, the words carry a weight that no tabloid headline has ever managed to match. This is the story of what Sophie said, what it means, and why it may represent the most significant moment in the Sussex saga since the Oprah interview aired in March 2021. To understand why Sophie's intervention matters so much, you first have to understand who Sophie actually is inside this family. She is not a peripheral figure. She is not a distant cousin occasionally photographed at Ascot. She is, by most accounts of those who study the working monarchy closely, the most trusted and most capable senior royal currently in active service. Sophie entered this family in 1999 under circumstances that were far from easy. The late 1990s were a bruising period for the House of Windsor. The press was predatory. Public trust in the institution had been severely damaged. And Sophie, as a young woman with no aristocratic background and a career in public relations, was regarded by many commentators as an unlikely fit. She stumbled early. There were media controversies. There were moments where her judgment was publicly questioned, and she absorbed every blow, recalibrated quietly, and rebuilt her reputation through years of consistent, unglamorous, dedicated public service. By the time the Sussex crisis was fully unfolding, Sophie had become, in the eyes of both the late Queen Elizabeth and King Charles, one of the institution's most dependable pillars. She took on royal duties that others declined. She traveled to conflict zones that more prominent royals avoided. She championed causes, particularly around eye health and gender-based violence, with a tenacity that earned her genuine international respect rather than the kind of manufactured celebrity that comes from a well-placed magazine cover. This is the woman who spoke. This is why what she said matters so profoundly. Sophie's central observation, stripped of its diplomatic framing, was essentially this. Meghan Markle never arrived at the royal family with the intention of becoming part of it. She arrived with the intention of using it. That is a serious allegation. It is not the kind of thing a senior royal says, casually or accidentally. It is the kind of thing someone says after years of watching a situation develop, after careful personal reflection, and, given Sophie's position, almost certainly after conversations with those at the very top of the institution. Sophie's account pointed to patterns of behavior that she said became visible almost immediately after Meghan joined the family. What she described was not cultural misunderstanding, not the inevitable friction of a Hollywood outsider colliding with centuries of protocol. What she described was something more calculated, a consistent effort, she suggested, to position rather than to belong, to perform proximity to power rather than to earn it through service, to construct a public narrative of warmth and openness, while simultaneously laying the groundwork for a very different kind of departure. The distinction Sophie drew between positioning and belonging is subtle, but it is enormously important. Every person who has ever married into a prominent family or joined a powerful institution knows the difference between those two instincts. One is the instinct to find your place, within an existing structure, to learn its rhythms, to earn trust incrementally, and to let the work speak for itself. The other is the instinct to immediately assess the hierarchy, identify its pressure points, and begin the process of reshaping it around yourself. Sophie, who had spent years doing the first thing, recognized the second thing the moment she saw it. What makes Sophie's account particularly difficult to dismiss is the consistency of the pattern she described across different settings, different time periods, and different members of the family. This was not a single incident misread. It was not one bad day or one uncomfortable event. It was a through line. She described early family gatherings where Meghan's behavior struck senior members not as nervous or overeager, which would have been entirely forgivable in a new arrival, but as deliberately strategic. There was, according to Sophie, an awareness of camera placement, an awareness of who was standing where in photographs, an awareness of which relationships, if managed correctly, could be leveraged for public narrative purposes. The relationship between Meghan and Prince William is where Sophie's account becomes most striking. She was careful, notably careful, to specify that there was nothing inappropriate about this in any personal sense. What she described was something different. She described a sustained effort to manufacture visible closeness with the heir to the throne in public settings, a closeness that, by her account and consistent with everything that has subsequently emerged in the public domain, did not reflect the private reality of that relationship at all. William's discomfort, Sophie noted, was visible to anyone paying close attention. The slight physical withdrawal at public engagements, the expression that hardened, just a fraction in moments where the dynamic felt wrong to him. These are things that royal correspondents who covered that period have quietly noted in their own retrospectives, and Sophie's account gives them a framework that the public had not previously been offered. The bullying allegations that surfaced in early 2021 were widely understood at the time as a palace operation designed to undercut the Oprah interview before it aired. That reading was understandable, given the timing. But Sophie's account suggests the public significantly underestimated both the scope and the seriousness of the internal record that had accumulated by that point. What she described was not a single email from a single aide, which is largely how the story was framed when it broke. It was a documented pattern across multiple households, involving multiple members of staff, compiled over a sustained period. Staff members who had left quietly, incidents that had been flagged internally and filed rather than taken to the press. A running log that, by Sophie's account, painted a picture not of a difficult boss or a demanding employer in the ordinary sense, but of someone engaged in a systematic effort to destabilize the people around her. The most significant detail Sophie offered was her characterization of how those internal incidents fit together. Individually, each one might have been explicable. Collectively, they told a story. And the story they told, she said, was of someone who understood that the easiest way to elevate your own position inside a hierarchical institution is to undermine the confidence and the reputation of those above you in the hierarchy. Perhaps the most quietly devastating section of Sophie's remarks concern not Meghan, but Harry. Because whatever one's view of Meghan's intentions or actions, the human cost of this entire episode is most visibly measured in what happened to a man who grew up inside this family and is now, by all available evidence, largely estranged from it. Sophie spoke about Harry with genuine affection. She acknowledged the real difficulties of his childhood, the loss of his mother at a young age, the particular psychological burden of being the spare in a family where the heir absorbs all of the institutional attention, the fishbowl existence that he never chose and never found a way to make peace with. These are real wounds, and she did not minimize them. But she also described what she observed happening to him from approximately 2019 onward, a gradual closing off from the people who had known him longest. conversations that became difficult to arrange, messages that went unanswered, requests for time together that were declined, often accompanied by explanations that centered on Meghan's feelings about whether a particular meeting would be helpful or comfortable for her. Sophie used the phrase psychological isolation. It is a strong phrase, and she used it deliberately. What she was describing, in its essence, was a man being slowly and systematically separated from every relationship that might have given him an independent perspective on what was happening to him, so that, by the time the public break came, there was no one left with access to him who might have talked him back from the edge. She revealed that she had personally reached out to Meghan during those early years, woman to woman, outsider to outsider, offering to share what she had learned during her own difficult transition into royal life. The offer was declined repeatedly, with a warmth that Sophie found more troubling than a simple refusal. Meghan, she recalled, always said she had Harry, and that was enough. Sophie's reading of those words, offered quietly and without drama, was that they were not an expression of contentment. They were a statement of strategic intent. The palace's silence through years of memoirs, interviews, documentary series, and legal battles was not, Sophie made clear, a failure of nerve or an absence of response. It was a decision, a considered, deliberate, top-level decision based on a simple and ultimately correct assessment that engaging with someone who thrives on conflict gives that person exactly the platform they need to continue the conflict indefinitely. King Charles and Prince William concluded, according to Sophie, that the most effective response to a performative campaign of grievance was not counterargument but indifference. Not cold indifference. The door, she said, was never locked from the inside, but institutional indifference. The palace would continue its work. The working royals would continue their service. The state functions would continue. The carol services would continue. The early years research would continue. The overseas tours would continue. And the Sussex narrative, deprived of the institutional reaction it required to sustain itself, would gradually run out of fuel. By Sophie's account, that strategy has worked. The commercial partnerships have contracted. The audience for the grievance narrative has shrunk. The fundamental contradiction at the heart of the Sussex brand, selling royal association to an audience, while simultaneously telling that audience the royal family is an institution not worth associating with, has become too visible to ignore. Sophie closed with a precision that suggested long thought rather than spontaneous emotion. She said Meghan had treated the royal family as a stage. The royal family, in return, had treated her as a member of the family, right up until the moment she demonstrated she had never intended to be one. It is a sentence worth sitting with, because it does not express anger. It does not express bitterness. It expresses something much more final and much more difficult to argue with: clarity. The clarity of someone who watched events unfold at close range over many years and has now, at a moment of her own choosing, decided that the story has reached the point where plain speaking is more honest than continued silence.